Welcome, everyone, to another episode of It's a Wrap with Rap. I am your host, Ron Rappaport. I would like to thank all of our great listeners, viewers, supporters, and sponsors for helping to make this podcast such a success. The podcast is being heard and viewed in all 50 states, all provinces of Canada, and over 70 countries around the world on all major platforms and the podcast website. Please visit our website, itsawrapwithrap.com, to find all the episodes, previews of future episodes, and find products offered from our sponsors. This podcast features people who have overcome life's challenges and adversities, people who can inspire, motivate, and educate us on an assortment of topics. My guest today is Linn Rivers. Linn teaches people a different way of living and being in this world. She is a functional health and wellness expert and educator. She teaches people all over the world how to take their health into their own hands, mind, body, and spirit. Linn has over 15 years of education in the holistic health field and assists people in overcoming chronic health conditions and mental disorders. While her educational background is diverse, it's her own journey that really sets her apart. She is able to connect with people on a wide range of traumatic events that she had to overcome by herself, such as death of all family members and a partner, abandonment, neglect, sexuality, growing up with an alcoholic, depression, relationship trauma, homelessness, career challenges, lack of directions, feelings of hopelessness, gender identity, anger and fear, addiction, illness, and near-death experiences. Linn uses neuro linguistic programming, hypnosis, and mentorship to connect directly with the subconscious mind to make relatively quick and dependable shifts in the neurological system. Her educational background includes holistic functional medicine, microbiome therapy, spiritual counseling, Eastern and Western massage therapy, yoga therapy, life coaching, Death Doula, hypnosis, and human design analysis. Welcome, Linn, to the podcast. So great to meet and talk with you. This is going to be such an interesting podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Awesome. Tell us about your formative years growing up, and some of your growing up years, some of the challenges you had to deal with. I know you dealt with an alcoholic parent and bullying was a problem. You experienced in school, and did you have any professional help along the way facing your challenges?
Yeah, let me give people a pretty good rundown of my childhood. So I actually started this journey off pretty rough. I had pneumonia when I was 1 and 3, and I was tied down in incubators. And I really like to share the story of the fact that I started this journey off in this world afraid of love and happiness, because as a baby, you take on the feelings of the words that you're hearing. You don't actually understand what they mean. You take on the context of how people are saying them. And when I was in the hospital and was almost dying, my parents were obviously afraid. So when they would say, "I love you," it came out in a sense of fear. And so my brain registered love as something to be afraid of. And so when I got to the age about 4 and 5, and I could actually comprehend the word that they're saying, "I love you," I would shut down. I would get I would get really tense, and I'd be really angry when I would hear the word love, and I would never say "I love you" back. The most I could muster up was "you too." And I kept that in me until I was 8 years old, when my grandma was in the hospital, and she was my favorite person. She's who I spent the majority of my time with when I was able to. And for the first time at the age of 8, I said, "I love you." And she died literally 3 seconds after I said that. And so as an 8-year-old, you have a narcissistic brain that connects everything to you. You think everything revolves around you and happens because of you. And so I thought I killed her by saying "I love you."
Wow.
So I shoved that word down the rest of my teenage years and adult years, into my late 20s even. And I didn't even tell my mom that I loved her when she died when I was 15. And so that was a big part of what actually got me started on the path of, like, okay, first journey, you're afraid of love. And so with that being said, I had, yes, an alcoholic father. A lot of my memories revolve around being in the car with him and my mom clinging to me out of fear as he swerved on the roads and cut people off and were flashing people. those are my primary memories as a child. And the majority of my family died before I was 15 years old. The rest of them followed soon after. I had asthma. I was in and out of the hospital the majority of my teenage years and childhood years. I had hormonal imbalances, endometriosis, suicidal depression from very early on in teens to all through my 20s. And I was on antidepressants and all these antibiotics, and it wrecked my gut microbiome. And so the health kind of declined as I got older, and then ended up having two near-death experiences. One at the same time that my partner at the time was diagnosed with the same cancer that my mom died from, and they ended up passing away. And I got better, but ended up with another near-death experience soon after because my body was still just really shutting down. And it eventually came to the point where I realized that I had been creating my own reality to the point where I attracted a partner that died from the same cancer that my mom died of. And that's really where everything just took a big turn. And I started being very intentional with my life and what I was creating and what I wanted for myself.
Wow. I mean, that's just a lot. Did you have any help along the way?
I did not. No, I was put on a very solo journey. I remember tapping in and trying. No, granted, in high school, I barely graduated high school, and I had a teacher who she pushed me through. She got me by, she
Yeah.
got me there. But outside of that, I would go to therapists, and I was so already self-analytical that they wouldn't know how to help me. I had several of them say, Lynn, you already have unpacked everything that we're trying to get you to understand. And so therapy never worked for me because I was already very self-conscious as far as wanting to be better. And so I just had to really learn to pull myself out of my own holes. And every time something happened, my friends at the time would literally have a trip or something big was happening in their life to where they couldn't help me. So in the times where I was suicidally depressed and on the floor, I had to learn to just sit and breathe through those instances. And when I was in the hospital, I didn't have anyone to help me out. I had to figure out like, okay, let me figure this out. And my dad died a week before my appendix ruptured. And so I had to take care of his estate and everything right after coming out of the hospital and almost dying and having an attached tube to me while figuring everything out. I was put on a very different path and had to learn a lot of hard lessons very quickly.
Wow. Now I've had a ruptured appendix as you have, and I know what that's like. And just to go through that and to do all of this alone is just, amazing, that somebody could do that. And
Yeah.
I mean, did you ever have any what got you through? I mean, a lot of people in that situation would just give up.
I know. And
What got
there
you
are a lot
through?
of times that
Yeah,
I asked, why did I not give up? But to be honest with you, I've always had a strong connection to my ethereal world, if you will. Very early on in life, I think from my first two near-death experiences as a child, I had very prophetic dreams. From the age of 3, I can remember dreams still. And I've always been in contact with my family who've passed away. My mom was always a very strong guide for me when I was through my teenage years. She would come every once in a while and talk to me through my dreams and tell me things that were happening in my life and how to just keep going, how to pull myself out. And I think if it had not been for me having that form of connection in some capacity, I don't think I would have, because if I wouldn't have known that there's something other than just this physical world, there would be no reason to. But I felt like I had a guidance system of some sort that was just showing me like there's reason for all of this. You have a lot to teach people and keep going. Like you're learning so much. I was always learning so much. And the premise of it all was, why are all my family members dying? Why am I sick for the first, half of my life?
right.
And how can I shift that so other people can get through this stuff too? And I think that wanting to take down a part of the system was so strong for me that I wanted to get to that point where I can share this with people.
So that the catalyst was down the road, you knew that you were going to share this with others and help others?
Exactly.
Okay. Can you briefly describe to us and our audience what is holistic functional medicine?
Yes. So when you go to the Western medical system, you are going to have two things happen. You're going to get a diagnosis, and you're more than likely going to get a prescription for the symptoms that you're experiencing.
Right.
The symptoms that you're experiencing are not diseases. They're symptoms of a root cause. There's an imbalance in your body. And functional medicine comes in to actually figure out why these symptoms are happening in the first place, so we can correct the imbalance, so then you don't have these symptoms anymore. So it bypasses the masking of the symptoms and gets straight to the root cause. So while people might be having Alzheimer's, dementia, schizophrenia, all these other kind of mental disorders or physical disorders, diabetes, the whole nine yards, while they are seen as a diagnoses in the Western medical system, we see them as symptoms of, hey, you either have gut dysbiosis or there's an imbalance in your neurotransmitters or something of that nature, right? And we want to understand why it's happening so we can actually fix your body so you can get better instead of end up getting worse down the road.
So a lot of times when they're diagnosing you and they're giving you that prescription is kind of like a Band-Aid. It's not
Correct.
really, it's taking care of part of the issue, but it's not taking care of the whole issue. And
No, all it's doing is masking the symptoms.
right, and our doctors out there in the, in the Western world, that's how they practice medicine, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
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 And so I always like to remind people that, in the 80s and the 90s, we were taught to, you trust a doctor because they're educated. But
Right.
the reality is doctors are not educated, they're trained. They're trained by a very specific format, and they're told this is what you do. Right. And the smart doctors, the one who are even in the Western system, they're the ones that learn about the human body and why people are actually getting sick, instead of actually just telling people take this and the symptoms will go away. And that's the biggest thing is you don't just hand over your trust to the Western medical system just because they have an education, right? You really need to learn about the human body and understand why these things are happening so we can actually get better as a society.
Right. And some of the Western doctors are going above and beyond to figure out the root causes, but not, I would say, what, maybe 10,
Oh, very
maybe
small percent.
5%, maybe less.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just throwing out a raw figure. Tell us, Lynn, about your career path before you started helping people deal with their life challenges such as addiction, relationship issues, hopelessness, etc. And when did you decide to make your life's work in the field of functional health and wellness?
It wasn't always a straightforward journey. I mean, the second I started out working, I can't tell you how many jobs I've had. I was actually, funny enough, thinking about this last time. I was like, oh my God, how many jobs have I worked since I was 16 years old? And it's comical because I've done everything you can imagine, like food service and working in like Target and Walmart and all of these corporations. And then everything from Intel and MCOR, working on NASA panels, to all of these different chiropractor's office and grocery stores and everything you can imagine I've done, right? And I was always just trying to find my place. And working in the holistic grocery stores was kind of like one of those, like, oh, I love helping people with the natural supplements. That was very early on in my journey. And so I knew that there was something to it, but I never connected the dots until I was probably about 18 years old and I went into school for holistic nutrition. And that's where the journey started. But I went in and out. I did photography and I still do video work. I make documentaries, but it really didn't take hold till about 5 years ago when I got out of the hospital from the ruptured appendix. And my gut had been so destroyed by the antibiotics that my body was shutting down again, to the point where I almost had a heart attack from throwing a Frisbee. And that was the moment where I was like, I want to understand this in ways that any practitioner has never been able to help me with, whether it was Western medicine or other functional medicine practitioners. and I became an independent researcher. And that was the moment where I started learning about things that nobody talks about. And that became I need to get this information out there. And so I would say 5 years ago was really the pivotal turning point for me.
When you went to do your research, how did you know where to go to do that? How did you know where to get that information?
So I'd already been in the field. So I know about the basics of health and wellness, right?
Yeah,
And about the
yeah,
human body, how it functions. And for me, I've always had this ask more whys, right? So like a lot of people, they stay baseline. They're like, okay, the liver's not functioning. So this means that your detoxification isn't doing well. And that's where they leave it, right? Oh, okay, my detox pathways aren't working. Great, that's good to know. I'm always like, okay, but why are they not working? What's the next why after that? And then you
right.
get to that point, and then it's like, okay, but then why isn't this working? Right. So I've always been one of those who keep asking until you get to the absolute base
Right.
of the original why.
Gotcha. So let's dive into the tools that you use to help people. Explain to us about your use of neuro-linguistic programming, kind of what it is, and can you give us an example of how it worked for a patient of yours?
Yeah, so the way we communicate with our clients is everything. We can either set them up for success with the words that we use, or we can set them up for failure with the way that we use our words. And the best way that I can describe this is there are a lot of instances in the Western medical system where people are either misdiagnosed or they're given a diagnosis in a really harsh way. And one of my favorite memories, if you will, from all my research is this guy who was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctor told him, you have 4 months to live, go home, take care of your house, your family, whatever you need to do to just get ready. You're going to die soon. And the guy went home, he took care of everything that he needed. He died almost 4 months to the date. And the doctors come to his family a few months later and say that they actually misdiagnosed him. It wasn't his charts. And he actually did not have stage 4 pancreatic cancer at all. And the power of the mind is so powerful that we take on beliefs more than we've ever been taught. And that's why there's a lot of people who are misdiagnosed with other things, and it might not be a death sentence, but they start taking on the symptoms of this diagnosis when in fact they don't have it. And the second that they are told, oh, sorry, this was a misdiagnosis, all the symptoms disappear. And so the words that we use are so powerful. And if we are telling people you have the ability to heal, and we're asking bigger questions and we're getting them to think outside the box and to answer their own questions for themselves, we can really set them on a path of healing and get them to transform in a much more beautiful way, and to stop taking on all of the context of other conversations that they have going around them on a regular basis, because we're constantly being programmed. If people are watching TV, if they're watching the media, they're constantly being programmed. And that's what neuro-linguistic programming is. It's really shaping our questions and our conversations to help people elevate instead of bringing them down.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a placebo effect in some instances.
Bingo.
Uh, like you don't feel good, you think something's wrong with you, you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Hey, you're fine. We ran all the tests. You're great. You're good to go." And the next day, you're fine.
Right.
So it's the power of the mind. The mind is really the one that determines all this. Can,
Yes.
can you tell us about your use of hypnosis and mentorship?
Yeah, so that's basically along the same lines, right? Of
Right.
really helping people reprogram their neurological system. And hypnosis in that context is secondary to healing the body, because the reality is, if you don't have a physical body that's actually working optimally, you're not going to be able to reprogram your neurological system well, because it doesn't have the nutrients to do so, or it doesn't have the capacity to. And so that's like a secondary thing in my practice. But as soon as that is implemented and we get their body to a place where they're feeling really good, the next step is hypnosis, where we're working with their mind, where we're teaching them how to reprogram the way that they think, the way that they operate, or habits in their lives. And I mean, a lot of people know about hypnosis, like the fact that you can stop smoking from one session with hypnosis. And it works really well for people when their body is actually doing the work to reprogram. And so I think a lot of people, they get thrown off by hypnosis because they're like, well, it didn't work for me, but the reality is there's so much more that goes into it. And it's a really powerful tool, and it can be really beneficial for people when they have the physical capacity to allow it to work.
Okay. Now you also employ human design analysis.
Mhm.
Tell us about that technique.
So human design analysis is just something I kind of fell into, and there was a point in it that really changed my life. I was in a really dark space in my early 20s when I first learned about it. And there's a certain aspect where you learn about your human design. So human design really comes down to the fact that there's like four basic types of people in the world. There's manifestors, generators, projectors, and reflectors. And manifesting generators, that's a fifth category, if you will. And within these types, there's different ways that we operate in this world. And it was a really profound thing for me to read, because when I learned about my specific design, I have an emotional wave where I can be really high one day and really low the next. And when I found that out and I had someone tell me, okay, so you want to be on the baseline whenever you make any kind of decisions,
Yeah,
that changed my life so much. Just that one piece of knowledge, because unfortunately, I would tend to make decisions when I was either in my really high point or my really low point,
right.
and then I would regret it very soon after. So it really taught me how to learn to center myself and not make decisions right away, and to sit with those things, because my design is not meant to do that. Other people, they can know right away, like, okay, this is a decision to make right now. Mine is to wait. And so I help people also understand their human design and how they can implement it for themselves, but also to work really well with their family members or their business partners, because the better you know each other's design and what they're capable of, like what their best techniques are and how they best get through this life, you can really delegate things and understand how to speak to people on a completely different level that really brings you guys together more.
Okay, that sounds great. Now, what is the most common addiction problem uh, you've dealt with your clients, and what tools do you use to help them? And what is your success rate?
So technology is the number one addiction at this point. It's,
Really,
oh,
technology.
yeah, absolutely.
It surpassed alcohol?
Well, yes. Well, because you think about the fact that everyone is constantly carrying their phone around with them, and to leave it aside for even 10 minutes
Yeah,
can really bring people into a sense of panic. And it's unfortunate. Like, we are really living in a high-tech society right now where everyone is super easily accessible, and it's bringing forth this extreme sense of um, instant gratification. Right. So everyone expects everyone to be on all the time. And well, you should have your phone with you. Like, why don't you have your cell phone? And so I work with people. One of the first things I teach them is, okay, you're going to go out, you're going to leave your phone in your car, and you're going to go spend time with your friends without your phone. No pulling it out on the table. No, none of this
right.
always having it attached to you has become like part of their wardrobe. And so I work with people on how to gently move away from having their phone. And I was one of those people. I mean, when I first got a cell phone, I had it attached to me all the time. And I had to learn, okay, let me just leave this at home for 20 minutes. Let me go away, go on a walk without it. And it is a huge addiction. And it's unfortunate how detrimental it is to people's health, because I've watched people really panic when they're in my sessions with me and they don't have their cell phones, and they're like, oh my God, but what if someone's trying to call me right now? And I'm like, okay, well, it's only an hour long. Like, they'll be okay. You'll be able to get back to them in an hour. And so it's one of the biggest addictions. And I just work with them through hypnosis and through understanding the addiction. The first part is understanding that there is an addiction to this component, because a lot of times it's not seen as that. And so when it comes into that focus, it becomes a more, oh, this is something I need to work through. It's not just a cell phone, it's an addiction.
Well, I mean, you mentioned being addicted, to the phone and people calling you and that, but don't you feel that these apps and these platforms like, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter or X, whatever it
Mhm.
is, aren't they kind of geared to making people addicted as
Yes.
well?
hmm
You know,
that's the big part of it.
because I know you can look at the movies, they have a little videos, those little 30-second videos, and people are
Uh-huh.
addicted to that stuff.
Yeah.
It,
Yes,
they,
they are.
I mean, they can look at that for hours.
I know.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
So
that's a big part of it.
what's your success rate?
So I have a very fine line approach now as to who I take on as a client.
Hmm.
And they have to go through an intake form and actually do the work. It's a high price ticket item because it's for people who are really actually going to make the investment to get better. And so at this point, it's 90+%. Before that, when I was just inviting anyone in, it was a lot lower because I would give people the tools and what their homework was, and excuses would just come left and right. Oh, well, I can't do that because I have a thing on Friday. Oh, I can't do that because of XYZ. And that's where I really started fine lining and really just doing my due diligence with who I was inviting in as a client, because
Yeah,
I want to be successful for people who are ready for that work, right? Not just people who are throwing out the money with hopes that they could get better and not willing to take the steps.
right. Can you talk about unfolding in relation to this topic?
Unfolding?
Yeah.
Unfolding what?
I heard you talking about unfolding. I don't know. I thought it was a term that you used. No, I
No, I
might
don't think so.
I might be wrong. Okay. Okay,
I'm curious.
okay, we'll move away from unfolding. Let's discuss relationship issues. How does childhood trauma play in all this?
The reality is that the majority of people in relationships at this time in life are in relationships with people who are perpetuating their traumatic experiences as a child. And that it's this could you could say this is a big reason for divorce rates, but that's not where it ends, because people just continue to look for people who are either one assisting them in navigating their traumas through their past, issues with their parents, or they're just stuck in the cycle of, I need to replay this over and over again, and they're not aware that they're doing it. And so conscious relationships are they're happening more and more now because people are becoming more aware of their traumas and understanding them, and no longer just picking people who represent their father or their mother and those same aspects. But it plays into it so deeply. It is completely intertwined because we're looking for that solution that we did not have as a child, right? And so what we're really looking for is ourselves. We're looking for the whole piece of who we are. And a lot of times people search externally for that instead of actually learning to like love themselves first, and to really venture into what it is that they want in life. They're just more accustomed to see the patterns. And even though it's a subconscious tendency, they go after those because it fills a void.
Now, you've talked about microbiome. Tell us about microbiome therapy that you utilize in your practice. I'm very interested in this.
So it is absolutely one of the most important parts of what I do. And in fact, at this time, the two things that people can book are functional medicine practices with myself and also mindset coaching. But within the functional medicine, the microbiome, I really like people to understand what it is. First off, it's literally trillions of bacteria and viruses and fungi that live in your body And we are more microbiome than we are human cells. And I'm talking 90-10. We're about 90% bacteria versus 10% human cells. And it's a symbiotic relationship. When we take care of our gut microbiome, it takes care of us. And our gut microbiome is linked to over 85% of diseases at this point. When you have a dysbiotic gut, you can basically turn and try to figure out what's actually happening in order to get down to like, okay, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and MS and all of these different symptoms, and turn it in and find that, oh, I have a gut dysbiosis and these specific bacteria are actually causing these symptoms. I mean, we have literally millions of cells running from our gut to our brain. And so I'm surprised that it took us this long to understand how much our gut plays into our mental health too. And so it's just one of my favorite topics. And it's one of the first places that I go to when I'm working with people to get them better and to heal through chronic health conditions and mental disorders.
Do you use probiotics a lot?
Yes, and there's very specific probiotics. You don't want to just go out and buy any probiotic off the shelf because they're not created equally. There's a lot that goes into probiotics, and it can, be a make or break for histamine intolerance and gut dysbiosis, and also bloating and all of these different things. You have to know where to go with probiotics.
Okay, and I would say most of your Western medical doctors really don't know much about this, do they?
Not at all.
They just look at you like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, the fact is, yeah, they don't even prescribe a probiotic after you were just on a week long of antibiotics, even though they know at this point how detrimental antibiotics are to our gut microbiome. The majority of the Western medical system is still not prescribing a probiotic afterwards.
And that's why people can get stuff like C. diff and things like
Correct.
that. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Many people probably never heard of tell me if I'm pronouncing it right, a death doula,
Yes, a death
D-O-U-L-A.
doula.
Tell us what it is and what they do.
So a death doula is the opposite of birth doula. It's about helping people transition out of this world, helping them be more comfortable through the transition and to give, it's kind of hard to say this. So a lot of people who are in the Western medical system, when they go in and they're about to die, they are pumped full of drugs. They are basically taken away from the experience of their own death. And death is absolutely one of the biggest parts of our existence. We live, we die. It is the opposite, of our birth. And we go from one point to the other. And we're supposed to experience our death. We're supposed to be present with it. And a death doula comes in and assists people in being present with their death and making it as comfortable as possible, and being a spiritual guide to them in whatever form comes through. And there's a lot that goes into it, but really it's just about being there and being a guiding light for them to feel comfortable about moving into the next part of that life.
Much different than hospice,
Correct.
where they just pump you full of drugs.
Correct.
And, and,
Yes.
and it's
Yes, a
and
big
that's
part
it.
of a death doula's work is to educate the family and the dying party of why to embrace the process and to allow them to move through it, because a lot of times they have a much more beautiful and easy release when they die, when they're actually able to feel it, because then they get anxious when they're not aware of what's happening and they're just pumped full of all these drugs. They don't have connection to their body at that point, and so it can send them into a lot of anxiety.
So how many people use a death doula? I mean, very few.
It's becoming more common nowadays.
Yeah.
I personally don't do that work anymore. It was just a training that I ended up going through very early on. But yeah, it's becoming more known now, because I think a lot of people are finally like wanting to connect with their bodies more and to have a better experience in general while they are in that process.
Does the death doula utilize supplements at all, or is it strictly,
They can.
oh, they can?
It's up to how the family is involved and if they have says and if the person is capable of talking and what they want. And so it really just all depends on what they're looking for.
Okay. Now, of the adversities that you had to overcome, which one stands out as the most difficult one? And I mean, we rattled off all of
Yeah.
your things you overcame, which was a laundry list.
Right.
Which one stands out as the most difficult one?
That's such an interesting question because before, I thought it would have been my mom dying when I was 15 years old
Yeah.
because I was a kid and I was struggling already with a lot of other things in life. And I think that for me was probably the hardest just because I had no awareness of how to exist at that point in life. Right. And my dad didn't know what I was doing at that age. So it was just kind of like I was on my own as far as my lifestyle and what I was doing. And I was already in bars by the age of 17. And so I think that was probably the most difficult, but I mean, everything else was also really difficult too, and took me a lot longer to overcome. But I don't see any of it as difficult when I look back at it, just because I was like, well, it was just part of my process, it was just what happened. But I think if you look at it from a perspective of age, being that young and losing your mom while there was a lot of other stuff happening, that was probably the most detrimental.
Would you say the second most was maybe the suicidal ideations?
I think, well, I mean, living with constant mental outbursts in general,
Yeah.
that's difficult. Like, I mean, that definitely made me not want to be here. And that was the part that was actually like, even when I wasn't suicidal, having the emotional ups and downs constantly was enough reason for me to not want to be here. And that's honestly the biggest reason why I do the work that I do, is because mental health is not looked at from the perspective that it needs to be looked at. And I bring that to the table for people. I actually teach people about why mental illness is happening in the first place.
Yeah. And there looks like there's a lot more mental illness out there than there ever has been,
Yes.
from my perspective. Do you think the pandemic had a lot to do with that?
No, not at
No,
all.
no.
It's our health is the biggest, 99% of our mental health is because of our lifestyle. And when I say lifestyle, that incorporates everything, what we eat, how we eat, what we do, how we're active, what we're watching. And so when we can fine line that and actually get our body in health, everything else is able to function better. We talk about the gut being the second brain, but I say it's the first brain because we had to eat in order to really build our brain to what it was. Meat, it was the basis of building our brain to it's what it is now. And so it really just comes back to what you're feeding your gut is going to affect how your entire brain is operating.
That's really interesting. What you're eating is very important.
Yeah.
Do you offer your services virtually as well as in person?
Actually, most of my work is virtual. And I do offer one-on-one sessions. The functional medicine it's priced high because of all the testing that goes into it. However, I did recently create a course. It's actually still in pre-launch, so it's not done yet. But I created a course for people to take it and learn about their body and all of the things that we're talking about now and so much more in order to overcome health conditions that we're talking about. And that's $50 because I want people who don't usually have access to this information to be able to get a hold of it. And so that's my main focus right now is that course. And I do still take one-on-one clients virtually from all over the world. But that is an investment. I'm ready to invest in my health and wellness, and I want to become better in this life kind of investment.
So that course, is that titled Chronic Illness to Vibrant Wellness?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So that course is $50. And is that just a book you get, or how does exactly does
No,
that work?
no. Yeah. It's a course online. So it actually has a platform where you can connect with people from all over the world who are also in the course. And you take it, it's just at your own pace. It's a lifetime access. And you just go and you learn. I have all the different topics from your organs and how they operate, your cellular functions, liver, like why your liver isn't functioning, and all of these different things that you can have, and genetic mutations, and all of the tips and tricks to actually get your body back in health. It has the number one reason why all of Americans at this point have diabetes. And so it's a really profound course. It's all online. It's going to be up within, I mean, by the time that this airs, it'll definitely be out. So
Okay.
no doubt about that.
Okay. Since you've been doing all this, just a quick question about you personally. At one point, obviously, you were going to a doctor to figure out what was going on or whatever. Since you've been trained in this and know what you're doing, do you still go to a doctor?
No, I don't. I am my own doctor.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't,
And
you're fine, right? Yeah.
I'll tell you why. I think it's really important that we know our own bodies
Yeah.
and when something is off and how to correct it.
Right.
And when I was 17 years old, that was the first aha moment for me. We had dial-up internet at the time. It had just taken off. So we had the AOL,
Yeah.
and something told me, research this thing that I had been dealing with for years. And I kept going to the doctor. They just kept giving me antibiotic after antibiotic. And something was just like, just Google this. And Google had just taken off. So I was like, well, is there going to be anything? And sure enough, there was a solution that was listed. And I was like, okay, a natural cure for this thing. Let me try it. And sure enough, I do it. And it's gone 2 days later and never came back. And that for me was the biggest aha moment. And I was like, there is something to this, and this is what I'm supposed to do. And the next step, I got rid of my asthma, which the Western medical system said, oh, you're always going to have this. You're just going to have to deal with it. And I stopped. I was on inhalers and steroids for as long as I could remember. And all of a sudden, I no longer have to use those. And so that for me, from that moment on, I never saw a doctor again. I learned about everything that I was experiencing, even when my organs were shutting down. I gave myself the capacity to know. I knew what was happening in my body because I was trained in these things already. And so I got my body back under control, and I was helping people who were diagnosed with cancer overcome their symptoms within weeks. And so from there, I never did unless it's an acute condition. That's where I say Western medical has a place in acute conditions. When my appendix ruptured, absolutely I needed to be in the hospital because I had peritonitis, right? And I can't stick my own my own
Right.
stomach, everything. So
Right.
there are reasons to see a Western practitioner, but when it comes to chronic conditions, that is not what they're set up for. They're not set up to actually help people get better. They're set up for acute conditions when something is wrong and you need immediate care.
What's your opinion on people with cancer?
So cancer is also just a symptom of an imbalance. Cancer is also just saying, hey, there's something out of whack here. And I'm going to give people a huge tip right here.
Okay.
That cancer feeds on glucose. And if you connect the dots, 88% of the population has insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is a precursor to pre-diabetes, and pre-diabetes to diabetes. And 50% of Americans right now are either pre-diabetic or have diabetes. Cancer feeds on glucose, and glucose is the reason for all of these diseases. And on top of that, insulin makes cells grow bigger. So glucose goes up, insulin levels go up, you have cancer cells, insulin makes those cancer cells proliferate. So it's this easy connection. And when you are allowing yourself to go into ketosis, which is a completely different story here, cancer doesn't feed on ketones, right? There are very few cancers, like literally very few cancers that will still feed on ketones, but for the majority, they cannot feed on ketones. And so when we just bring it into that fine line, and you can understand like, wow, our lifestyle is really affecting us to this point where we're allowing these cancer cells to continue growing, and we're feeding them, directly feeding these cancer cells by what we're eating. And this could be even considered what people think are healthy diets are not actually going to benefit these people. And this is why I see a lot of people who go on the vegan diet thinking like, oh, I'm going to be healthy, I'm going to eat healthier. And yet here they are filling their plate with all these high carbohydrates, and yet feeding, continue feeding the cancer from there. So I think that's like one of the biggest tips that I could give people. There's so much more to it. There's so much more that goes into that. But having that little piece of information alone, I think is going to be an aha moment for people to want to ask more.
Is that something that's covered in the course?
Yes, it is. It's one of the biggest pieces that's covered in the course.
Okay. I mean, I can actually tell you that I have talked to medical people, trained in Western medicine, and I brought up that glucose, the same thing you just mentioned, where the cells feed off glucose. And I can't tell you how many of them said, no, doesn't, it doesn't, it doesn't. That's just a fallacy. And I'm sure you've probably heard the same thing.
Well, that's the unfortunate thing is this is how they're trained. This is what they actually believe because this is what they were trained in their practices. They weren't trained to actually learn about the body and what's actually happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
But you have heard that, right?
Oh yeah, from other practitioners
Yeah.
that you know that, yeah.
Yeah.
Even though there's all the research out there, that's my role is to uncover all this research and bring it to people where they can see it.
Right.
Because it's there, people just don't know how to look for that information.
Now, how can people, Lynn, if they want to contact you, how do they do that?
Easy. You just go to www.linnrivers.com and that's LINN rivers.com. And all of my information is on there and I'm very easily accessible through just, you can either email me through there or you can sign up for any of the products on my website easily.
Okay, www.linnrivers.com. I will put that in the podcast notes. Just closing out, this podcast deals with a lot of people overcoming life's challenges and adversities. Just a little off topic from what we've been talking about. You have gone through so many challenges and adversities in your early years and subsequent years that you've overcome. What can you tell people out there who are struggling? What bit of wisdom can you give them?
I think there's 2 points, right? And one is to remember that this life is just a journey. Like what we're experiencing is we can overcome everything. And the more that we can become aware that we are creating our own reality allows us to shift out of those spaces, right? Where we're no longer creating those traumatic events or we're no longer inviting people in who represent those traumatic events. We can actually start moving forward in better ways. And the second part is that overcoming trauma is actually the bigger way to look at this is to heal your body first and get physically better, because otherwise you're going to keep having episodes, whether it's aggressive tendencies or depressive tendencies or anything of that sort, that you're going to keep continuing to connect to these traumatic past and the events instead of realizing that those were just events. They are in the past, but the thing that's still giving you the symptoms is your physical body. And when we can remember that, that is where we're able to really start reprogramming our mind, because then our body actually has the nutrients that it needs to function properly. And we can set our vagus nerve back down. We can bring ourselves back into homeostasis. We can really come back to a centered place where our body can do the healing, which also means the mental healing also. And so a lot of people who are stuck in this emotional trauma, they're not getting better because they have a body that's not allowing them to get better.
Okay, great advice. I know we could spend a lot more time talking on the subject, and hopefully we're going to have you back. I want to thank you, Lynn, for being on the podcast and educating us on holistic functional medicine. I want to wish you much success helping people overcoming their challenges. And once again, thank you so much for spending time with us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Comments and suggestions for the podcast, you can email us at itsawrapwithrap@gmail.com. Our website is itsawrapwithrap.com. Facebook group, It's a Rap with Rap. Instagram, It's a Rap with Rap Podcast. We're on Twitter or X at Rapper, WRAPPER 130. All the episodes are on YouTube. It's a Rap with Rap, the podcast uncut. I want to thank everyone for listening. Please stay safe. And for now, it's a wrap.